Tony, how are you
I
doing?
am.
Good. How are you, my friend? Well, good. Well, today we are talking trauma and relationships. Not that those are ever affected
Yeah,
by trauma,
they're
correct?
challenging and tricky, but it's a good topic to talk about. I've had a couple even in my office this week, and I'm like, wow, this works out good. I just got to talk about it, so now we can talk about it on a bigger scale.
And I have enough trouble doing relationships without trauma. And then you introduce trauma to it, and it's like, hey, well, now it's a little complicated. But let me quick introduce you. So people following probably know me. I'm a therapist, work with people to have healthier, better relationships. Tony is a therapist as well. He's a good friend and a mentor. He's also an author, and he has a great Instagram channel as well. So Tony, I'm thrilled to be on here with you. I know we are usually not meeting on camera, but it's good to have you
having me
today.
on in camera, and I'm excited to just kind of do what we do, which is talk about stuff and talk about how people interact with each other, and it's interesting, and hopefully we can help a few people.
That's what I'm going for. So I'll start off. We had some questions, which I love, and then we'll make some time to answer some questions. So my goal is let's tackle the questions we did get. And then if you're watching and you have more questions, feel free to just put those in the comments, and then we'll go back through and try to answer them as best we can. But maybe the first thing that I'd speak to is, as a therapist, and I can answer this too after you, but what do you think about when someone's coming in and talking to you and they're like, I have this history of trauma and I'm trying to be successful in my relationship? What comes up for you when you hear that?
Way to go, right? If you've been in a bunch of hurt and all this stuff, and then there's this piece in the back of your brain that goes, I think I want to risk getting hurt again. I think I want to risk being close to someone, and to be able to kind of fight through that and say, I think I want to learn how to do that. I think, great. It's a lot of work, but it's achievable. It's stuff that you can kind of fix, but it's a little bit scary at first to kind of go, I think I'm willing to take the risks. If they're coming in the office and they're like, can you help me with my trauma? It's getting in the way of my relationships, and they're recognizing where it's kind of getting in the way. That's really cool. And so I guess I would say, applaud those people. It's like, way to take that step and that risk, because then you can start to grow and learn a little bit more.
Yeah, I feel like that too. And I feel like so many times people come to me and they're like, they almost say it like in this way of they're embarrassed. You know, they're like, I've got this trauma and I'm in a relationship. And I'm like, well, that can actually be a brilliant thing if you learn what to do with that. So it's kind of a cool thing for us, because I'm like, I might get to talk you into this might not be as bad as you think. Like, it will require work, but
there's that
too, if
risk
you do the
that
work.
if people are willing to do that, because they know in the back of their head is like, hey, I think there's a different way. I think there's a better way, a healthier way. I don't know what it is yet. I'm trying to figure it out. So when you see that person sitting across from you, you're like, I know you're scared and you think it's daunting, like you said, kind of embarrassing. I got this trauma and I think it's going to screw up my relationships. But it's really cool to kind of go, no, you know there's something back there and it's worth it. Let's go on that ride together. So I like doing that kind of work.
Yeah, I do too. And I think what's cool is that they know it, right? So no one comes to us and says like, hey, I had trauma, I want to replicate that in my relationship. So it's like, well, I don't have to convince you that this is a problem. You already know that, and here you are. So one of the questions was really about that, that I got. So when people come to us and they talk to us or they enter in those relationships, oftentimes they know what they don't want, right? They know where they've been and how that worked. But the trouble they kind of have is trusting their gut in the relationship after having that. So what do you tell people about that when they're kind of like, I don't even know where to start.
Right.
I don't know if I can trust myself.
The tricky part is getting them to trust themselves, because a lot of times people that have had trauma, they're like, I'm putting my wall up, I don't want anybody in, and they come in, they're like, problem, somebody snuck in, somebody's in my heart, and I care about them and I love them, and now it's activating all this trauma and I don't know what to do and how to handle this. Is actually trust your gut. They didn't sneak into your heart. You may have been lying to yourself and saying, I'm not letting anybody, but you recognize something in that person, that they are treating you valuable and worth loving. And so it's just really learning to trust that gut, because if you've had some trauma, all the stuff that's happened up until that point probably hasn't been very healthy or good. And your brain starts to think, oh, that's who I am. I'm not worthwhile. I'm not lovable and valuable. It's just really slowing down to go, you know it. And you even let this person in a little bit because you thought they were going to treat you differently or better. And they do. And so it's just really trust your gut, because a lot of times they don't like to trust their gut, but you've actually already let someone in, which means that you're lovable and valuable, and they're probably going to treat you okay.
Yeah, and I think a lot of times people they feel like what's really the matter is that they can't trust their gut, or that message is the issue, but it's usually the audience, or at least that's what I find with people is like, I think you can trust your gut. it's just the audience matters. And maybe you're not great at choosing the right audience, but it doesn't mean you're wrong and you can't believe what you think. So the first start is, okay, like you said, I think that was great. You've let somebody in. So whether you meant to or not, somebody's gotten past this wall that we thought we put up. Now we care. And really that first kind of thought process is like, it's fear, right? And it's fear that I'm going to somehow wreck it, or I'm going to do something that's going to blow this thing up.
Or the other person's going to figure out the real truth, and then they're just going to leave and abandon me. And the reality is slow down and just do it different, right? And to recognize it's okay that you have that fear, right? Just label that fear not as you're unworthy and you're going to get abandoned. That fear is, I don't know what I'm doing, right? Which is okay. You don't have to know what you're doing because you probably haven't been in some healthy, good relationships or haven't even had that role modeled, right? And so that fact of I want a healthy relationship, but I don't know what to do and I don't know how to do it, label that as fear, but label that fear as normal instead of the fear of, oh, this is a sign that I'm not worth being in a relationship and I should just give up and it'd be terrible. No, you just don't know what you're doing. And that's not terrible. That means we can learn and grow from that. Let's go figure out how to learn this.
Right. And having some grace, I think, around that fact, right? Is sometimes it's like, well, people talk about their history. How would you know how to do this? And if I came from that, I have no idea either. And so just kind of normalizing, if you're not taught to do this, you don't know. And that doesn't make you a bad person. It just means you don't know. And so what I love is a lot of times when people come in for help, they don't know and they know there's a problem. And I'm like, that's actually like beautiful because most people don't even get to that place.
Right.
So
and then give yourself the grace. If you don't know, and we want you to do it different, you don't have to get it right the first time, right? Let's just start trying. Oh, that worked very good in the relationship. That one didn't work very good. Instead of, I'm so dumb and stupid, I don't know this, try some things different. And they're not always going to work perfectly. But if you're trying, that conveys a huge thing to your partner of, I'm workable, I'm willing to grow, I'm willing to try this. That keeps relationships going, whether they're from trauma or just an average, normal, healthy relationship. We always got to keep sending our partner that we're willing to grow and do it a little different.
I'm a willingness all day guy. When people are like, hey, I'm willing, you're going to be just fine. You'll screw up for sure. But like, if you're willing, you can overcome that. And so I think what you're saying is when we have trauma, we come to realize in a painful way that like things can change like that. And so with that, we now have some fear that if we're not careful, we'll do something to lead to that same feeling. And so this idea of grace and practice seems really foreign because, hey, that's how I ended up here, Tony, is like, I didn't see what was happening.
If you look back at a lot of people's trauma, a lot of it, they're in situations where the other person isn't workable or they didn't have any choice or any power in it. And so now when they're in a situation where they are in a relationship with someone that's workable or has a little bit of power, it's hard to kind of know, it's like, oh, I can make a mistake. I can keep talking about it and fix it and move on because that other person isn't just going to bail on me or abandon me. No, they're healthy and good. That's why they're in that with you, and just learning to know you can make a few mistakes.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I think doing that and empowering them to kind of have the voice where they maybe haven't had one before and just saying, it could be different, I think is really important. What do you do? So someone said, well, what do you do when maybe you are the person in the relationship that wants to get help, but the other person doesn't? Because I know you've probably seen this as much as I do. One is super willing and the other one isn't.
And
what
I guess
would you tell a person?
We have to slow down and talk about it two ways. Is it the person that doesn't have the trauma, so they're in a relationship with someone that has trauma and you don't have that trauma? You're like, hey, I want this person to work on their trauma and do some of this stuff, and they're not willing to, or they're too scared. Is just to recognize what role do you play in that and what part can you control? Because there's a big piece that you can control, right? If you're in a relationship with someone that's had some trauma and puts their walls up right away and it's kind of tricky, is know what happens when that trauma gets triggered, right? If you are that partner and all of a sudden they get triggered, what are they going to do? They're going to push you away, right? And so if you're that person that's trying to love on someone and they're pushing you away, that can be really difficult and frustrating. And if they're pushing you away really hard and big, you can get scared. Oh man, they're telling me they're leaving me. They're telling me this is never going to work. And they put this big, huge wall up. Well, if you're that other person, you're like, oh no, this is crisis mode. We need to solve this. And they start trying to solve this and reassure and do that all. Well, what happens is the person that's got the trauma or got triggered, their feelings aren't getting heard. And so they get even more scared and pull back. And so it's just a cycle. So if you're that person, is just know what your job is, right? Which is to, one, reassure you're not going anywhere. There isn't crisis. It's okay. And then this is the hard part, is can you let some of those things fly by, right? When they're saying, hey, this relationship's terrible and it's never going to work and I don't think you're going to be all right. When they're pushing that away, can you just go like, okay, they're just triggered. They're just scared. We don't have to solve whether we love each other and the marriage is going to work. We just need to slow down and get safe first. And so you can recognize that. You can do a lot of that work without that other person getting their help or doing that.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think you can always invite them, right? So if you feel like they have that work to do, or that's part of it, or would improve things, you can always invite that. But
right.
I wouldn't use that as an excuse not to do your own thing, right? So sometimes I'll see people say, well, I'll do this if you do it. And like, that's ultimately not where we want to be. And so we just invite them. But even to your point of just narrating the process, here's where I'm at and here's how I'm feeling, can really let the other person in on the process, and actually helps them to know too, because when they know that, they can try not to activate that stuff. Now, it's not always going to happen.
That's awesome, Jason, is illuminate that process, right? If you talk about the crazy circle that's happening, it actually makes it a lot safer, right? And the cool part is you only need one of the two people to recognize it, right? If the trauma person can recognize and go, hey, I'm just getting a little upset and triggered and I'm pushing you away. I just need to, that's all I'm doing right now. Oh, that solves the whole thing, right? Or if the other person's like, oh, I think you're pushing me away and I shouldn't just have to listen to all these things that are not quite accurate. I'm not going to spend my time and listen, we're just going to slow down and connect. You just need one of the two people to go, hey, I think we're doing the same stuff again. We're doing that same dance. And you can shine that light on it, like you said. How we fix it, we can fix that a bunch of different ways. But when you're in it and you can't see it and you can't stop it, that's when things get messy and crappy.
And I think that's where people are most wounded usually, is in that place of feeling completely isolated and disconnected. And so I know even sometimes when I work with people and they kind of call attention, like, oh, we're doing that thing again, they'll even kind of smile, and you probably see it too. We're like, oh crap, yeah, like we're in it, we're doing that thing. And then it kind of takes the power out of it, because now we're doing it together.
And that together thing is just, that's what you're going in
Right.
any relationship, but especially when you have some trauma in the back, is you want it to be you two against the world, right? That feels awesome and great. And like you said, when it's just you by yourself, you against the world, that feels really crappy and scary and lonely. And when you're feeling that way, we say stuff, we do stuff that isn't really cool, isn't really healthy, isn't even accurate. But when it's the two of us against the world, we feel pretty good and we can handle everything and we can do that. And so that's always what we're trying to do, is can we get you two against the world, even if you're both sitting in the mud together.
Right. Even if it's like, well, we are both in the same problem,
Yes.
but I'm with you at least in this. And so I think that relationship I would work on, I would work towards, because I think when we have that person who's willing to kind of own where we're at, that makes a big difference. So, okay, so that's great. Someone asked, what do you do so you're in this place, but it's not the two of us versus the world. It's actually one person versus the other, and they feel like when the person's triggered, they take it out on them. What do you think people should do in that situation?
You recognize what's happening, right? Are they taking it out on you, or are they taking their trauma out on you, right? And kind of, you know this from doing a lot of that trauma. The big thing with trauma work is we're always just trying, don't let your trauma speak for you, right? Don't let that past stuff. So when all this hurt is coming at you, is that the person you're in a relationship with? Or is that the trauma and the hurt speaking, right? Can you start to see that? And that's hard to hear, but if you can start to separate that a little bit, oh, that's trauma, and that's not actually how they feel about me and how they think about me. Now I can slow us down and ask a few more questions and stay in it, but don't let that trauma speak for you.
Right. And I think there are, there's like always boundaries and there's consequences for what we do. But to your point, like sometimes we're just sort of blindly swinging, like just for a great movie reference here. I always think of Bloodsport, where the sand's in the guy's eyes and he's like, he can't see and he's swinging. And I think our trauma does that to us, right? Where it's just sometimes we're triggered and we'll swing at anything because we're terrified. And the unfortunate thing is sometimes the people who love us most, they get hit. And I'm not saying literally physically hit, but they are affected by that and by our lashing out. And so to your point, sometimes having that objective stance of, I don't know if it was about me. It certainly hurt me, but I don't know if it was about me. And this is what we need to do to fix that.
Your analogy, just take that one step back. So when they're swinging and they're giving all these verbal stuff, it's like, I'm not going to engage this right now because that person's triggered, and that's just hurt, scared, fear. I'm just going to let them know, I love you. I'm not going anywhere. Let me know when we can slow that down a little bit and talk.
And then keep inviting them. Because I think to your point about that reassurance is just to say, like, hey, I'm not going to step into this right now. You're doing a thing that I think is not helpful for both of us, but I'm going to invite you over here when you're ready. And so at that moment, come on over, we'll work on it. But I think sometimes couples lose that willingness to invite the other person, and then it feels like something's wrong with me, and in my woundedness, I'm abandoned.
And you have to kind of think about it.
Right.
If that person's too close and you're triggered and you're trauma and you're swinging those punches, if you get hit, is that person going to be really loving and kind to you? Probably not, right? They're going to take that step back. And so that's the tricky thing about trauma is we're pushing people away when what we really want is them to be close, and because we got kind of scared. So we push them away and we're like, hey, how come they're abandoning me? How come they're not near me? He walked away from me in a fight. Did he walk away and abandon you, or did he walk away and take a pause? Which one was it, right? If he's walking away in a fight, that's probably okay, because it'll actually make your fight shorter, because then you don't have to hey, sorry for saying that, sorry for doing that, I didn't mean that. Now you actually just can fight about whatever that issue was, instead of having to do the great big repair of all the, I'm sorry for the 15 things I said that I didn't mean. No, it's a lot of work.
Nope.
I didn't really mean when I said this. I didn't really mean this. I kind of meant, can we talk about this one? This one? And I was just angry and knew that would hurt you.
I've got my little notepad. I'm like, one of this one. But we get that way, and it's not that we mean to, but we go there because we're kind of fighting these ghosts, right? And so some of that anger is really for somebody else that isn't present. And so the people who love us well get that. And so as you see people walk this out in relationship, what would you tell people are the most important things that you've seen that actually help people get through it and have the relationship?
Can you be real, right? Instead of that lashing out, can you be vulnerable, take that risk and go, hey, I'm triggered, I'm scared, I'm feeling like you're going to bail on me. If you can say those real questions, it solves everything and makes it easy, right? If that person who's triggered goes, hey, I'm afraid you're going to leave me, you will actually see their partner go, that's easy. I'm not leaving you. I'm just mad at you because of this. Oh, but that's the biggest thing that makes that change is, can you take that risk and go, I'm scared, I'm worried. And if you're the other person, I don't know what to do right now. I see you hurting and I see you swinging blindly. I don't know what to do. That just makes everything go better instead of guessing and trying to figure that out. So the number one thing is, can you just be real and acknowledge where you're at?
Yeah, because I think we always respond well to that vulnerability, right? So it's kind of, if I can show up in that space, I'm role modeling to the other person to do the same, and they often will. And oftentimes they feel like, hey, I'm really at a loss here and I feel triggered. The other person's not usually going to respond harshly. They're going to respond with kindness. But if we point it at them, so I'm always saying to people, don't point it at the wrong person. If you're pointing that at them, to your point, you're not making it easy for them to love you. If you're like, well, I'm going to call you a bunch of names and stuff, but like, you're supposed to give me a hug. Would you do that? How does a person do that? That's not easy.
Absolutely.
So I think it's those boundaries. And I think the other thing is just the hope, because the truth is, anymore, a lot of people have trauma, but a lot of people have healthy relationships too. And so there is a lot of hope in this.
Yeah,
that
and I think
can
when
get
you
better
talk
with
about
some
that,
effort.
it just kind of triggered is remembering when you've had trauma, can you learn to separate what's a trauma response or a trigger and what's just normal relationship struggles, right? Is if you don't have any trauma and you put two people together that have two different feelings and two different views and two different stuff, you're going to have little bit of resistance. You're going to have some trouble. And so can you learn to recognize, is this my trauma acting up? Is this guy abandoning me? Is this everything terrible? Or is this just a normal relationship challenge, which we're going to have, and that's part of being in relationships. If you can start to separate those out instead of labeling everything that comes your way as, hey, this is trauma, and this is because I have trauma. No, this may be because you're just two people living together and you're not going to match on some stuff. And it's not life or death and these big trauma things.
And for that, I think you really need community or a mentor or a therapist or something like that, because they can help us kind of normalize some stuff. Because I think when we don't know, we're apt to think that anything is related to that, And then, of course, that funnels back to it being our problem. And so just to say something like, no, people are just annoying. And if you're married to somebody, you're dating somebody, like they're going to be annoying sometimes. And that doesn't have to be about your past. I think that is really empowering for people. And they're just
you
like,
probably see
oh,
that in sessions, and I see that.
Oh,
they're telling you about a fight, and like, oh, I had that fight with my wife. And they're like, you did? I'm like, yeah, that's kind of normal. That's okay. Yeah, because it is empowering, is you're not alone. And just to remember, if you have two people together, you're not going to match on stuff.
Right. And that's just part of the deal. So, okay, well, this is good. Let's switch. So I'm seeing we're getting some questions. So I want to try, if we can, I know, want to be mindful of time here, but let's go back up and see. Well, we get a lot of questions. So we're going to do our best here, everybody, to answer what we can. We have, how do you set healthy boundaries when you want different things? So that was a question. And obviously with trauma, boundaries can be difficult. So what do you tell people about that?
First of all, is know what boundaries you want to set, right? Are we just pushing people away? Because then we're setting boundaries all the time and different stuff, and they're not always healthy or the best ones. Is to kind of slow down. It's like, what boundary are you trying to set? And just helping people kind of walk through that. Well, I need to have my own space when I'm upset or angry. Oh, okay, that's a really healthy, cool, smart boundary to set. How are you doing that? Are you telling somebody that, or are you just kind of slamming the door and walking off a thing? And so it's just, if you want to set boundaries, they're hard, but just slow down and go, what boundary do you want?
Right. And does it help me to get the thing that I'm looking for, right? So that's the other thing is like, if our boundary is a drawbridge that just, either lets people in or out like that, I don't know if that's what we're going for. It's more of a guardrail situation. And so does it help us to stay on the road we want to be on, or are we using it, like you said, to actually kind of eliminate some people or block
some people will set that boundary and go, I don't want anything to do with them. Actually, your boundary is you want them in there and you want to feel safe and secure. So I don't know. I like that drawbridge analogy. Just kind of having them on there and flicking them off is probably not too healthy, right? And so if you've done that a couple times, where do you think they're going to be standing? Right on the edge. They're not going to be close because it wasn't very fun. So it's learning that, how do you articulate the boundary you want? And if you've had some trauma, just remember, don't let that trauma talk for you. You're valuable. You're important. You can set boundaries. They're okay. And that person loves you. They're not, when you set that boundary, they're not going away forever. They're actually going to respect that. And so trust that a little bit.
And look for their reaction. One of my favorite things is when somebody really cares about you and you give them a boundary and they're like, oh, I hear that, I respect it, I just hate that boundary. That to me, I'm like, actually keep that person around, because they're doing something that's pretty amazing, which is they're letting both things exist at once. They're like, I hear it, I respect you, and it's also not my favorite, but I'm going to do my best. Like, that is actually really meaningful and important. And so I would always tell people, don't throw that person away, because
I like that with that reaction. If they hear that boundary, like, whoa, I don't like it, but I'll respect it, they're showing you a lot of love, honor, and value in that. Hey, I don't like that, but I like you, so I'll figure out how to make that work. That's pretty cool.
Absolutely. Okay, let me ask another question.
Oh, we're good.
Okay, yeah, I can go a little bit longer. So the next question I have, and this is one I get a lot too, is, and I'm just going to essentially, what if you kind of cope by just trying to forget about your trauma and what's happened? And then when you try to figure it out, you begin to wonder, is it worth it or relevant to dig it all up? So, and I'm sure you get this from people. If bad stuff has happened, I've had trauma. What's the value in actually talking about it?
The short, easy answer is extremes are never good, right? Never talking about it or analyzing every day for the last 15 years of what happened probably isn't a good move either, right? And so I always like to kind of think in themes, right? Okay, so what did your trauma teach you? What was kind of the theme or the message there? And then was it accurate, right? Someone a lot of times, if they get abused, was that your fault? Did it have anything to do with you? Does it say anything about your value? You're going to take away from that, I didn't feel very good and I don't think I matter. Okay, that was a lesson it taught you. Let's go back and look and go, was that lesson fair? Was it accurate? Did it make any sense? If it didn't, and then we got to learn how to figure out the new lesson, or maybe you are valuable, maybe you are important, which I think you are, of course, right? Is we don't need to go like, well, let's go through every little time that you learned about that you weren't valuable. No, if you can recognize that theme, oh, okay, I just need to recognize when my abuse is talking. Once in a while, I'll say something that, oh, I'm not valuable, I'm not important, I don't matter. Or is that the abuse talking? Oh, I think it's the abuse. Okay, then you go on.
Absolutely.
I don't think you have to go through every little thing because that's daunting and scary.
Tony, I'm clients for life. I think they need to go over
Just
every
keep talking
detail
about it,
forever
man.
for the
Right?
rest, and we
We'll
just need
even
to
do stuff if we're not
analyze
sure.
always. No, I mean, I'm like you, and I joke with people about it, but the goal isn't to like analyze everything, but to your point, where does it show up and how does that help me or bring me away from the things I'm trying to do? And so it's if it's relevant, let's talk about it. If it's not relevant, then there's not a lot of benefit in just chasing after things to have problems with. And what I hear when I hear this from clients is oftentimes the reason they're even considering this is because someone is telling them there's a problem. And so I will kind of say, well, what do you think that's really about? So maybe we don't have to dig into everything, but if you're hearing the same message from multiple people in your life,
what do you think it's about?
mean?
I ask it in the way of, so tell me, what'd your trauma teach you? I don't know. I don't even want to think about it. Okay, well, we got to think about it a little bit. What did it teach you, right? Because what's happening is other people are going, hey, we hear this stuff or we think this, and they're recognizing you're acting in a way that doesn't quite seem right or doesn't quite seem okay. And it's actually validation. It's like, oh, you're acting like you believe this lie from this trauma when we see you and you kind of should be acting like this, but you jump back there sometimes. Okay, what's your trauma teach you? What did you learn from it? I don't know. I don't want to think about it. Okay, well, you got to think about it a little bit.
Right, or accept where you're at. But it's like if you're hearing these are opportunities. So I'm always like, let's actually focus on what the issue is, and then if just for funsies you want to talk about every other thing that's happened, we can do it. But first of all, let's just talk about the thing. So I love that. Next question is, how do I deal with adulthood trauma about infidelity between parents? It says that's affecting my relationships now because I've been cheated on multiple times, and so I'm scared. So basically, to me, I hear this as
that the people in the relationship they're having infidelity or their parents did.
I'm a little confused because it sounds a little like both, because they said how to deal with adulthood trauma on infidelity between parents. It's affecting relationships now because I've been cheated on multiple times.
Okay, well,
times too, so I'm scared.
Yeah, I would just say first of all, keep those two things separate, right? If we're talking about, hey, your parents cheated on each other and got a divorce, there's some trauma there, and there's some stuff that hurts, and right, what'd you learn from that? Just like what we were talking about, what'd you learn from that? Oh, I learned that relationships are terrible, bad, and they're not worth anything. Oh, well, let's kind of correct that or fix that. And then if you're in a relationship now and that piece is happening, how do you deal with that? I always tell couples is you need to know what you're talking about. Are we talking about your marriage, or are we talking about the infidelity and the affair? Those are two separate topics to talk about, because if you lump them all together, it's like, well, apparently since my parents had divorce and infidelity, then it's my fault and that's why he cheated. Whoa, keep them all separate. Slow down. They're hard topics to talk about and we got to address them, but go slow and kind of figure out, all right, what part did you bring to the relationship in the marriage? And then how do you feel about when you got cheated on and hurt, right? Because those are two different things. How that person responded to your marriage, that's on them. They have to own that responsibility for the affair. But if we talk about what kind of views or stuff did you have in there, can you look at that and see that a little bit?
Yeah, and then what do you want to do with it, right? So if I think about the parental one, you didn't get a lot of say in that, right? Your parents probably didn't ask you like, hey, is it cool if we cheat on each other? But if you're an adult and this is happening in your relationship, you actually have a say about how you're going to handle that. And so I'll kind of just stop people and just say, hey, just hurry a little bit. You get to make a decision here. Obviously not a decision you want to make, not an easy decision, but you get to make that decision. And so what do you need to know to make a reasonable decision about what's going to happen?
That question's a good example of how you just got to really slow down and look at your feelings and separate out each one, right? Is your past with your parents? That's a great one to talk about. Your marriage, that's a great one to talk about. The affair, that's a great thing to talk about. All those things are good to talk about, explore, but if we put them all together and we're trying to make sense of it, our brain's going to go, well, we always make us the bad guy, right? We're the villain. It must be your fault. It must be you. And so then we just kind of pull back and I can't make any sense of this, so it must be me. Well, be careful. It's not necessarily. We got to if you do those slow and work through them, you can sort that out a little bit. Correct.
Yeah, because otherwise it's overwhelming. And I'll say to couples, like, I could barely help you solve one problem, let alone 10 at once. And so it's kind of, we can spend time on each of those and they may all be worth investing time in, but not all at the same time. And so how do we start with the most pressing and work from there? let's see. I'll have one last question here that I'll read, and for the others that asked the question we didn't get to, I will try to do reels, or Tony will do reels, and we'll try to get those answered at a different time. But for today, I see, can you provide any tips for dating a widower, someone whose spouse was killed a couple of years ago and now they're trying to date that person? Obviously, there's trauma there. Any tips that we would have about that is what they're asking.
Way to take the risk. That's how it's cool how God works sometimes. How I start and how we end. It's that same spot. Way to take the risk and go, I want to be out there and I could get my heart again, hurt again. And it's really tricky, but to kind of recognize, why are you doing that? Right? There's this piece of, I want to be connected with someone. I want to feel loved and valued. And that's really important. And so is going slow, knowing that's why that person's in that relationship with you. And we don't have to compare like, well, what it was like in the past. Well, that's all going to get in there, but just slow down and always keep your focus on, hey, why are you in a relationship? Because I really like that person and that person makes me feel great. Stay there, start there. That's a good way to bring, and as you go through any trauma.
Absolutely. And I think if you're on the other end, so you're dating that person, I think it's like, first, you have to understand that it's a unique situation in the sense that that person is going to be thought of in a certain way. And there's going to be stories about that. And so it's going to be part of the deal, even if they passed away. And I think sometimes that throws people off because they somehow feel like, well, if you're a widower, like that other person doesn't exist anymore. And so it's not a part of the deal. And it's like, well, actually it is though. And so can you be okay with that?
That widower goes, hey, I really loved and valued the person I was with, and they played a big role in my life. That's actually someone that's like, oh, they're capable of doing all that stuff. That should gravitate you closer. It's kind of the same thing when step families go like, oh, I'm dating this person and he has a child. Okay, just so that's part of the deal. That kid is coming with, and yeah, he spends time with them and he loves them and he takes care of them and he does that. That's kind of what you're saying is, hey, I see this guy, he's really good with this kid, and I don't know if I like Sharon, or I don't know if I always like to hear that. And that's that same thing with that widow. It's like, yes, that person's going to be in their life and part of that deal. I like how you said it. It's a package deal, but it's not a bad thing, right? It doesn't say, it's not a judgment on, oh, you're second or you're this. Nope, you're in there and you're in a relationship with someone that's lovable, capable of loving other people. That's actually a good thing, not a bad thing.
And I get though how
feel scary,
feel that way, right? Sometimes I think if we're not careful, or feel like I'm competing against this person, but I think to your point, and really just a wise note anyway, is like you had said, we got to kind of think about what to let go and what to hang on to. And so some of that stuff is going to be about, and so I think if you get in that relationship, discerning is going to be really valuable.
The fun part about being in relationships is, hey, some of the stuff I got to let slide by because the other person's just upset, mad, hurting. And some of the stuff's like, now we got to address this and talk about this because this can bring that connection or us closer together and it can work. And so learning which is the fun part about being in a relationship.